Yeah, good evening again to everybody who is joining this webinar. My name is Hori Hadgu. I am a community member in Howard County, of course, and I'm really concerned about the state of our infrastructure, and wanted to. I think this is a very important topic, and I'm joined by Brent Lovelace. He is a long time, I would say, community advocate who has been very tireless in engaging with whether it's the Board of Education or the County Council or the County Executive on the infrastructure issues. And so we are fortunate to have him here with us today. I want to give the motivation. We have had APFO 101 in the past, which was really helpful. I think when I started participating in local issues, this was an in-person event like this one, which was hosted by Brent at the time. I attended one of those. This was one of the first community events. Really useful. It was the beginning of my knowledge where the issues are and what we're lacking in Howard County when it comes to infrastructure. Every 1 or 2 years, at least the last 5-6 years, we've seen some major redistricting proposals or actions. And the last APFO event that I attended that Brent hosted, was the impetus for that was also a major redistricting proposal that was made by the Board of Education at that time. People get upset, people are and start paying attention. Unfortunately, at the redistricting time, it's too late. We need to be engaged and be talking about infrastructure and schools long before the redistricting proposals come out, because the cake is already baked at that time, and it's just a matter of how to divvy it up. Right now as well, there's a redistricting proposal out there, and some parents are upset, and so they want solutions that will disrupt their lives the least. And this is a tool to help community members equipped with the knowledge to understand where it starts, where the process starts. And so that's why that's the motivation. And we have also, of course, the general plan coming next year. That's another one. Some people may know that the county does not have right now a plan for the school system, for how to deal with the general plan, what the general plan proposes, which is anywhere from 18 to 36,000 new residential units. How to address the consequent impact on schools and other infrastructure, but specifically, there's no plan for the school. So this is why I think it's important to hold this webinar. Get community members be familiar with the topics, and so Brent build on the previous APFO webinar, and add some additional topics here. Unfortunately, this topic gets split into proponents and opponents of development, and this is not the purpose. I personally think residential development is good. It's a matter of making sure that when we build, we're planning accordingly so that we don't deal with the unfortunate consequence of lack of planning. Scrambling that we've seen over the past 4 or 5 years is due to lack of planning. Before we go to Brent, I want to thank community organizations who are co-hosting this webinar. Just want to give a shout out to them. At the end, we'll have a couple of announcements. So stick around. And without further ado, Brent.
Thank you, everyone, for joining this evening. I hope this is beneficial. This is a very simple topic that we're going to be discussing that Howard County has made extraordinarily complicated. However, core concepts are still there. And this is not unique to Howard County. The Adequate Public Facilities Ordinance, or a concurrency law, they've been around since the 1960s. They've been tested and tried in the Supreme Court. In the state of Maryland, the Department of Planning offers the capability, actually the state offers the capability for any of the charter counties to create their own APFO. You will see Montgomery County, Anne Arundel, Baltimore, all having variations themselves, but they are unique from county to county. Hopefully everyone can see that okay. So let's look at our goal here. Our goal is for you to learn more about adequate public facilities ordinances, otherwise known as APFO. One thing you will notice if you go from county to county is sometimes they rename APFO. So when you Google it or try to look it up, it may have a different name, like subdivision staging policy in Montgomery County. It's still APFO. Luckily, we've kind of standardized on that name, and most people are talking the same language, but it is important. It can go by different names. The goal of this is to make the quality of your life better understand how residential development controls work, to motivate you to learn more independently. This is not something where we hand you a sheet and tell you exactly what to do. This is to motivate you to keep building your source of knowledge, to encourage your support for improvement. Everybody needs constant support for APFO to improve. Otherwise, it does have a habit of eroding over time. What our APFO 102 session tonight is not. It's not a complete review of introductory APFO topics or all advanced topics. We could go on for days. I'm not going to torture you with that. We're going to hit on about 4 key concepts, but there are plenty more that are relevant. This is not a platform to promote a political candidate or an organization. I greatly appreciate all the organizations that are co-sponsoring this, but I hold a role in the PTA Council. This is done by me as an individual to help, but I'm not endorsing a particular group in the process here. I really encourage, and we've seen in the past, bipartisanship support for some of the issues here. APFO 102 is not an organization to join, so you aren't going to see a Facebook page to click on and be friends with APFO 102. And it's not a forum to battle over specific details of APFO. I would love to get down in the weeds on particular topics, but we're trying to make the best bang for our buck here tonight. Tonight's session is supposed to build on the introductory APFO 101 session we held last year. Please feel free to look on past YouTube sites, have recordings of our 101 sessions, which help you learn the basics of APFO, and we're building on that. We'll do a brief introductory item here, but we're not going to repeat everything. And like I said, the little disclaimer, I'm not endorsing any particular group, candidate, or organization as a byproduct of this. What is APFO? We still need to ask that. And at the most abstract level, APFO rules are growth control regulations that are intended to pace adequate public infrastructure concurrent with new development. I was in a hearing last night with an elected official, and they described APFO as a series of pauses to give the county time to catch up with infrastructure needs. That is absolutely not the intent of APFO. Pauses are a mechanism or an incentive to have APFO operate, but it is very nuanced. It uses the pauses as described. It also uses areas where growth can occur. It also uses standards and measures. It uses utilization percentages. It's a very nuanced regulation to address more than a single issue. Most, if not all, items in a capital budget that require capacity expansion as development occurs are valid for consideration in APFO. Let's pause for a second on that. That makes this very simple to understand. Go grab the capital budget that comes out every year around May, look at all the items on the list, and ask yourself, if we were to double in size, what would we need to double proportionately? Would we need to double the number of schools, double the number of water and sewer that can be handled? Would we need to double the amount of roads or transit? If you see something that needs to expand as growth occurs, that is infrastructure related, not operating costs, but infrastructure, that is something that needs to be mitigated and handled through the adequate public facilities ordinance. So items like roads, schools, public safety, water, sewer, parkland, transit, social services, and more are all fair game to be in an APFO. Right now, our current APFO, which originated in 1991, really only focuses on road capacity at intersections and school utilization capacity. There are some minor things other than that, but those are the primary items. What I'm leading up to is our APFO has plenty of headroom for additional inclusion of resources that need to be measured for adequacy. I'm going to throw out another concept here. Other items can be included in an APFO, which include leased facilities or fleet expansion. We just did a lease for space for the police department, as well as a couple other agencies, if you look at recent legislation. And just because they're leased doesn't mean that they are not part of what we would consider a capital expenditure. They're just doing it on a month-to-month basis within possibly the operating budget or a special category in the capital budget. Where I'm going with this is you can misrepresent the amount of facilities, infrastructure that you need as a county by renting out everything. But if you were not renting, what would be the impact of having to expand it? That's something to keep in consideration. All right. Capital projects. Tomorrow night, the planning board is going to discuss capital projects for the school system. Many communities came out and fought hard for their individual new schools or renovations or improvements, and they're all fighting, for the lack of better words, to be number one on a priority list. And quite honestly, all schools, all infrastructure should be keeping pace with the rate of enrollment or growth that's occurring in the county. Because of that, let me ask a question here is, when you see these events occurring and we're talking about, oh, we funded this school, we opened that school, we put this on the priority list, we didn't put this on the priority list, that's addressing things as on an as needed basis, a best case basis based on the amount of revenue that they cut coming in. What we really need to know as a community is, what is the number of schools needed to resolve our overcrowding and eliminate our trailer classrooms? If Carrie and I had a discussion prior to this and just doing some off the cuff math, if we have roughly 10% of the students in temporary and portable classrooms to deal with capacity shortcomings, and we wanted to just eliminate that function or replace it with traditional brick and mortar schools with all the security and protections that they provide, what would it take? Well, if 10% of the schools are in trailers and we have 75 schools, that roughly works out to 7.5 additional schools would be needed just to get rid of the trailers. That would be roughly 2 high schools, maybe 2 middle, 2 elementary, and that could run on the order of $500 million worth of infrastructure. And that gives you an idea how far we're lagging behind with our current growth needs. We do not have enough capacity to deal with our growth needs, and on the school system side of things, it causes redistricting pressures. Nobody loves redistricting. There is a general theme that seems to flow throughout the community, which is regardless if it's to a better school, same school, most people do not like the disruption of an additional move in their educational background. Those pressures translate directly down to our students. And the pressures occur because of a lack of resources, we need to squeak out every inch of capacity we can to try to get 100% efficiency of our school system with low resources. But there's also a misnomer that that's all you have to do. Even if we did a perfect redistricting and redistributed every kid perfectly, we're still in a backlog of capacity for the school system. which means that not only do we have to fix the issue with the trailer capacity, we also have to solve the issue of all the schools across the school system that total above 100% utilization. That's another 6 or 7 schools that we're in a backlog to create just to resolve that issue and keep overall system-wide capacity down to 100% utilization. All these create additional pressures for additional and more frequent redistricting, especially when you start seeing schools spike at 110, 115, 120, 140% capacity utilization. One other concept that we need to keep in mind is without an APFO protections and without the appropriate financial mitigation set correctly for the market rates and to offset the impacts of the growth that we establish, we have the potential to raid funds from each other. And where I'm going with this is we have a deferred maintenance problem in addition to those other 2 capacity issues that we've described. Roughly, we're behind $500 million in maintenance needs for the schools as well. And some of this can be attributed to we under-contributed our development mitigation for decades, and that pulled a backlog. Funds that went into school capacity or construction may have been deferred to maintenance needs, or vice versa. Maintenance funds that were intended to keep the schools in good condition may be slid to make up for a lack or shortcoming of capacity funding. When that item is out of balance, all other items are out of balance as well to counter it. So I just listed 3 major infrastructure / financial backlogs that are occurring. The knee-jerk reaction is to go, oh my God, APFO is bad. We need to get rid of it. Look what has happened. No, APFO is just a framework for doing things better. What's bad within APFO is not APFO itself, but it's the measures, it's the tests, it's the rates that we charge. And those have been consistently for decades leaning toward the favor of development at the expense of the local citizens, and has created a massive decades-long backlog of issues. So what we need, and I'm not spelling out specifics, but what we need is thresholds that are powerful enough and have enough teeth that they actually keep things in balance and equilibrium so that we do not have a deficit situation as we continue to grow.
Hey, Brent.
Yes.
So going back to the previous slide, yeah, so that there, what was the cost to build high school 13?
Off the top of my head, it was roughly $140 million. The state contributes roughly 55% toward that cost. And there's also land costs, and that's kind of a gray area because the site was intended for 2 schools, not just 1, but there was a cost incurred with purchasing the site, grading it, prepping it, and all that. So you're looking for the county anywhere from $50-60 million for their share, and the land expenses, which could be on the order of $10+ million, plus things that the state doesn't cover. They don't cover architectural fees and other incidental items. And if you look at the site, that particular one integrated a water tower project in addition. So it's actually a bigger infrastructure project than you see on paper. The cost of building a school is going up very high with inflation. We did have a break in some commodity items like steel for a little while, but that didn't offset the majority of the expenses that occur. And if you look at the current school, it will be a beautiful school that people can be proud of in Jessup. But if you look at the original specifications for it, it also was supposed to have additional resources for a career training academy, which they had to shave off due to lack of funding. and
Mhm.
these things accumulate.
I think it's worth discussing my next question, because we'll be hearing it more and more over the next few years. Some people have presented the idea of using public-private partnership to address the funding issue and the speed issue. So yeah,
I'm
really,
sorry.
really quickly. Yeah, really
Yeah,
quickly, just
we
to
could talk all night
to
about that alone. Howard County is very addicted to public-private partnerships, and there is an impression just by saying that word, it's naturally a good deal. Public-private partnerships do have some advantages, but they do have disadvantages. It is very rare to use public-private partnerships for schools. And just so you know, the background of that is you do a risk sharing effort with an outside entity, and you're effectively leasing a facility for 20 or 30 years from them, and then they kick it across the table and say it's yours once it reaches a certain age. Ideally, for the people providing that kind of service, they want all the air conditioners, everything, all the facilities in there to age out right at 30 years and then kick it across before having to make a major infrastructure investment. And obviously, from our point of view, we hope that they keep those and replace them with brand new air conditioners and maintenance items right up to the final day, and we get a practically new school. There is a desire to use PPPs because there's an impression we can get a lot of things up front. And in theory, you spend less in the fiscal year one, you're making a payment plan as opposed to buying something outright. But your partners are there for a profit. So where normally you have a school system building a school with a one-time expense, in a public-private partnership, you're making continued payments on these items. Yeah, it's lower in the first, second, third fiscal year, but then those agreements you have with those entities to continue providing that service carry on for 30 years. You can't go 20 years from now, oh, there was a major change in the region. We're all doing self-driving cars or Jetson things, and we need schools in the West instead of the East, or vice versa. You've locked into a 30-year agreement. And when you do your budget every year, that becomes the number one person you have to pay. And then everything you need for every other need following that comes in second place. And Prince George's County is experimenting with that right now. They say they got 6 new schools, but put it in perspective, Prince George's County is a 200 school system. So they're very proud of only getting 6 new schools, of which they don't really mention that frequently. Only 3 were new. 3 were actually renovations of schools they actually already had. So they are locked in all their finances into their public-private partnership, and they will have some shiny new facilities right off the bat, but they will be their number one expense going into the future, and they have a lot less flexibility if they need to do different models for their students going forward. It's like I said, a risk sharing entity, and there are very real risks with proceeding with that for certain capital expenses. We also have an example, our courthouse is a PPP. It's literally only the second courthouse in the country that has gone with a PPP structure. And we're finding out there's a lot of strings attached, not only with the budget and the annual operating costs and the priority of funding, but what do we do with our beautiful historic courthouse left behind in Ellicott City? That became an expense that isn't even part of the PPP arrangement. And you're going to see a lot of traffic on that in the near future. And by the way, I don't have it on this slide. Courthouses and judicial resources, if they scale up with population, which they usually do, those are also ideal things to be tested for adequacy in an APFO. But let's go to the next slide here. The general plan. So like I said, we could go on and on. Let's go back to the basics. APFO just literally is a series of tests and growth measurements to try to get infrastructure concurrent with any growth that you approve. If you approve no growth, it's not an issue. If you have a declining situation, you're in Detroit or something like that, it's also less of a situation. But when you're in a high growth area like we are here, it is an issue, and APFO is your safety valve. One thing that is intertwined with this, we are going through a once in a decade general plan update. And I'm going to rattle through my talking points here. The general plan is required to be updated once every 10 years by the Maryland Department of Planning. It isn't a county thing. It is something that they're being told to do from the state. Howard County's first general plan was written in 1960. It featured conventional planning with industrial corridors, employment centers, and even a planned county airport. You're talking about airplane noise right now. At one point, Howard County was thinking of putting a big regional airport pretty much where the Columbia Mall was. So they had a very traditional general plan, which was their first one that came out of the gate. It had a lot of farmland and very traditional layouts. Can a general plan change? And this is the point I'm trying to make. A lot of people think that once the general plan is written by this committee, it goes through, it gets passed, it's frozen in stone. No, it absolutely can change for a variety of reasons. And let's go back to our original general plan. So the first one came out in 1960. In 1965, Rouse, Berman, the Moxley family, and others combined to establish new town zoning to add value to some land they were secretly buying up. The general plan was rewritten mid-cycle to focus on planned unit development and new town zoning. So literally the design for Howard County was just etched in stone, and then 5 years later they rewrote the book. And the takeaway I'm trying to bring here is we have this general plan process going through, and it is a monster, and it may seem like there's very little you can do to influence how you'd like the outcome. But if the general plan can be rewritten to suit a single for-profit development interest, I ask, why can't it be written to suit a public interest? So if we find there are areas lacking or needing improvement that coincide with APFO or not, I highly encourage you to be motivated and take action. The general plan can be modified at any point in time. Let's talk about the general plan just a little bit more and how it relates with APFO. The general plan includes guidance that can be applied to justify nearly any future zoning decisions. The general plan, and this is where it overlaps with APFO. A lot of people think these are completely separate topics. They're completely intertwined. The general plan contains the housing unit allocation charts that determine the maximum amount of development and exemptions to that maximum amount of development that can occur in the county. And that is in the general plan and updated yearly. Special regions and overlays used to distribute allocations. You see in the background of the slide, Howard County, that's all right, it's pretty much blocked out. But in the west, you can see there's green, and the east, you can see there's some pink and tan. APFO doesn't just determine the rate of growth, it determines where growth can occur too, or at least the rate of growth in geographical areas. There is long-range guidance in the general plan on how the county should apply APFO. And I find this one personally very amusing. There is a request in the last general plan to update APFO. We did not have a regularly scheduled APFO process prior to the last effort. And within that, it also says to adjust all the rates of financial mitigation to match market rates. Well, what do you know? We got the APFO updated. However, the rates have yet to be touched for things like the road surcharge. We've been saying it's something that's necessary for the county to function for over a decade. And the irony in that is we follow the general plan as if it were gospel for some items, but other items we don't. I think we should take the happy medium. There, the suggestions that help improve the quality of life, we should definitely take advantage of. The general plan also has things like the placement of the water sewer line boundaries, which support increased building density in the county. There are factions appealing for more infrastructure sustainability, while others appeal for more density. That's a pretty roundabout way of saying we have development interests which are really pushing to remove restrictions to development, And likewise, we have a lot of community groups who are pushing very heavily to make sure whatever comes out of the general plan is actually sustainable going forward without a loss of quality of service. And that's an important thing. You can always lower adequacy to make all the numbers work, but that isn't the goal of APFO. APFO is set your standards of adequacy and then adjust your variables to achieve that as you go forward. Into the unknown. As of today, in October 2022, and I'm saying this because it's being recorded and we may watch this in the future, the general plan draft has not been released. So we're only speculating. We got a pretty good idea from seminars what they're planning on providing, but there may still be quite a few surprises in there. In the sessions that have occurred, public sessions for the general plan updates, which talk about APFO at length, the DPZ is mentioned on the record a desire to completely remove APFO from the general plan and possibly replace the entire system with something else. I'm being a little sarcastic here, but I'm not. This is something we've heard multiple times during sessions. They would like to pull it out of APFO, whether it's the paperwork side and place it all in subdivision regulations, or literally the elimination of APFO as a process. That would be shocking compared to other counties that also do APFO. But when you do hear something else, ask for details. We would expect something significantly improved. Like I said, APFO is a framework, but the opportunity to improve is not get rid of APFO, but to change the standards within APFO to make it effective. But we will see in the near future what happens with that. My walkaway point for this is we need your community to remain engaged, informed, and advocate. And the general plan definitely overlaps with APFO and vice versa. And they are key things that you need to be aware of.
Hey, Brent.
Yes.
I think this might be a good time for us to make one of the announcements, which is this is just one group, one organization, Progressive Democrats of Howard County, prepared a petition. It's a change.org petition to call on the county leaders and Department of Planning and Zoning to include a plan for schools, for how it would deal with schools in the general plan. As Brent mentioned, as of today, October 2022, the plan, they have provided indications based on seminars and the chapters that they've published on different topics on what they plan to cover in the general plan. But it's very clear that there isn't anything for schools. So I'm going to post the link here in the chat so that people can take a look at it. But I wanted to plug that in while we were on this topic.
And all that I've watched and see this awkward overlay between APFO and how it manages school capacity and mitigation and utilization, and then the general plan, there is a bit of an expectation that our general plan would say, where are the next schools going to be? How are we going to get enough of them to accommodate the plan is very specific about the rates of growth at once. It should be a little more specific than vague concepts of how we're going to provide enough school sites for everyone. Let me segue into another core concept. We're running through the clock pretty quick here, so I'll pick up the pace a bit. Another core concept I'd like to bring up is when can we improve APFO? So APFO resides in the subdivision regulations. It resides in the general plan. Some of the tax mitigation is handled by the state and county. It's actually broken into multiple vehicles, which it occurs in. We did an update in roughly 2015 to 17 timeframe of the APFO. And a lot of people think that, okay, we'll have to wait till the next APFO to start making improvements. And a lot of candidates running for office, when asked about APFO, they instantly go, well, we're going to have a committee 1 year after the general plan concludes. Well, yes, because the last APFO update did say, we're finally going to have a regularly scheduled update. Unfortunately, what they said was conditional on the approval of the general plan, and it'll be a year later. And oh, by the way, we're going to have the Department of Planning and Zoning facilitate this and choose who is on it. And quite frankly, the Department of Planning and Zoning is policing itself at that point. APFO provides a lot of the controls for excesses that occur within the Department of Planning and Zoning. So it is something that you need to be very aware of, not only as it occurs and is passed, but seek opportunities for improvement now. Don't wait until the next committee. Seek opportunities as it occurs and seek opportunities after it occurs. It is continuous process improvement that needs to occur. So I'm mentioning we didn't have a regularly scheduled one until the last APFO update passed in 2017. The codes are updated frequently. Just the APFO charts that come out are voted on once a year. So APFO is touched quite frequently. And literally the last council session, they were talking about a tenet of it, mitigation, and they were debating aspects of that. Hardly a legislative cycle goes by where APFO isn't being touched or manipulated in some way, shape, or form. I've talked about the committee that will be held a year after the general plan update, and it will be very important for community involvement throughout that. And the selection of the committee members. This is important. I sat on an APFO committee. The APFO committee seemed to have an even distribution of what they called citizens and general citizens and development interests, with many political appointees kind of in the mid-range. But the selection of the individuals that conduct votes in these committees effectively determines the outcome right from the beginning. Before they've even discussed, you have a way which way it's going to sway. And it will be very important that you provide input, if not volunteer, for these opportunities, because without an appropriate representation of the community, the outcome of APFO can be drastically altered. And personally, I'm not going to go in detail. I've had some very, very, very bad things happen while going through the committee. It is the Wild West in some cases. We need to have lots of community oversight throughout the entire process, because it is community that is most greatly affected by what occurs in this. With that said, the person who's going to hold all the keys to the kingdom will be the county executive and their appointee, who works at their discretion, the DPZ director, who in turn will choose who they want on the next committee. So a significant amount of influence in the way the county goes through that channel. Another core concept, I haven't been rattling on about this to the PTAs and other groups and council members just because of timing. But just like the general plan has something tied to the end of it, and that is comp zoning, comprehensive zoning. And once a decade, usually immediately following the general plan adoption, people are able to rezone their properties, usually based on the guidance given in the general plan. And you will see a grocery list of requests, usually fueled by land development attorneys who go, here, submit for some upzoning, and we'll see if we can get you some density, occurring shortly after. It is very important. I'm going to keep this in the context of APFO. You're like, what does this have to do with APFO? Well, if you have significant amount of rezoning that occurs shortly after an event, that's going to have infrastructure requirements. Comp zoning does not require a certain amount of infrastructure to be in place for it to occur. It's just upzoning, period. So if we do a blanket upzoning of the county, there will be a wave of growth and density that follows it in short order. If your APFO is not solid then, especially because of grandfathering rules, you will be at a disadvantage. You will be behind on your infrastructure needs, your roads, your fire, your police, everything. The place to have your APFO running 100% perfect is the day before comp zoning starts. If it is not improved by the time comp zoning starts, all the issues that may result from a wave of growth will be allowed to be grandfathered in, and the general community has to either eat it financially or suffer from reduced service levels or levels of adequacy. So during the comp zoning process, it's effectively rezoning. Almost all the cases are upzoning, very rare downzoning, and it hastens the rate of infrastructure requirements. Here is an interesting thing that a lot of people don't think about. Obviously, any property may be submitted. So you're used to somebody with a big farm in the middle of a developed neighborhood, fair chance they may submit for some kind of upzoning during the process. But what a lot of people don't realize is the county can submit. You could be sitting in your split level bungalow in central Howard County, and all of a sudden the county submits for your entire neighborhood to be upzoned for transit-oriented development or something like that. It may be a good thing to you, who knows? But what I'm saying is don't assume comp zoning only affects those who go out and change the zone or request upzoning on their own personal properties. The county may decide your neighborhood needs to be upzoned as well, and you may be affected without even knowing. They do put little signs up in the lawns, but another component of comp zoning is it's an incredible volume of legislative actions taking place in an extremely short period of time. If you need community organization to deal with an issue, you have very little time to galvanize. So I am prefacing this because we have major events occurring in rapid succession here. A general plan update, an APFO update, and a comp zoning, all occurring around the same time frame. A very significant change to Howard County will occur as a result. I'm going to reference CB 32 2013. Who wants to go back 9 years and look at a 9-year-old process? Well, you probably do if you want to have a good idea what to expect going forward. The last comp zoning honestly upset a lot of people. They extended the water sewer lines westward, increasing density in some rural areas, as well as the Route 1 corridor really significantly increased density with Texas Donut development and transit-oriented development. So a lot of community members put together a referendum to change some of the more extreme changes that were occurring. Well, what do you know? That also initiated a series of legal suits. The people who want to profit from this issued subpoenas to the people who did referendums, put a lot of time, money, financial, political pressure up, and managed to basically squash a public referendum and the right to referendum. I'm not saying there will be another referendum, but I'm saying if there is, people need to be aware of that to realize that they need to be very particular about how they would proceed, learn from lessons past in order to succeed.
Just want to add, you mentioned the extent to which the attorneys, and the industry, some members of the industry, the extent to which they went to deal with this, they reacted to the referendum. I think from what I understand, they were very punitive, and they were bringing in retirees to depose them for several retirees, and also I think they tried to disbar a couple of two attorneys that worked with the referendum group, which was I'm sure a very stressful time to those attorneys, and it's from what I understand, it was a very terrible reaction to a citizenry activism to address some egregious zoning decisions.
Yes, and you hit the nail on the head. So the goal here is not to scare people away. The goal here is to educate people what to expect. We did see some very poor behavior where developers went to the extreme. They were trying to disbar fellow lawyers from ever doing business in Howard County again, just for the mere mention of the a referendum. And like you said, asking for extreme asks of various residents that were on. And it exposed a lot of issues with the referendum process, the legal process, and the process to appeal. And many of those have been left unresolved. And quite frankly, a lot of people are still exhausted from 9 years ago. But there's some ground rules that probably need to be addressed before the next comp zoning occurs. And this slide that I have here, anybody can go to the Howard County Council website, just Google Howard County Council, and there it is. If you find the legislation tab, I'm kind of hovering, it's kind of small print. You can see all the current legislation and past legislation that the county has done. I'm drawing particular attention to this one, CB 32, 2013. That is the last comprehensive rezoning. And I'm showing this to you because I'm setting you up for what to expect. A single bill, a single vote rezoned the entire county in 2013. Now it just looks like a little old bill here, right here, but let's look at the related documents associated with it. If you guys are used to a midnight session in the Howard County Council, these were the marathon sessions. And if you look, every individual property was addressed. There were late things that were added. There was rezoning that was occurring during the sessions. And you can see court cases were going on during that. Water sewer lines moving, density overlays, new ways of doing things. This is pretty significant, and this is what you're to expect. When comp zoning occurs under the next general plan, you're going to have a very abbreviated period of time to review dozens, if not hundreds, of property changes across the county and see what the impact is and see how it affects your public infrastructure and move from there. And with that, I would add, if your APFO cannot sustain this level of growth, it needs to be addressed before the comp zoning even occurs. But that's my opinion. You can take your own. But I highly encourage everyone to start researching what is involved. And see here, this was a battle in itself. Affidavits, how much were you donating to political candidates during the process? And likewise, there are properties in here that the property owners didn't even know they were being rezoned. The county came in and just started going, we're gonna add density to these particular areas and proffer it to a particular land developer to propose to you. So while this, like I said, this isn't directly APFO related, it absolutely is APFO related because they're tied together. As growth occurs, do we have the mechanisms and safeties in place to provide adequate schools, water, roads, police, fire, and all the other infrastructure needs that we need as a county? And if we're behind, the best we can do is keep at the same level that we're currently at. I have links here. You can do a screenshot for where to find a lot of this information. It is hard to find, but once you get used to it, it does follow a familiar pattern. Another slide, can't resist. I got to put it on there because we drew it. This is from the last APFO session. Who influences APFO? And you can see it is, you could do a red string chart like they do in the TV shows. You can present it like this from a gravity point of view. But you can see the building industry has a significant influence in the outcome of our APFO right now. I'm not going to suppose that you aren't from the building industry, but other entities have influence. But you can see Department of Planning and Zoning has a lot of influence, the general plan, the capital budget, APFO charts and how the schools system handles capital expenses, one-time grants from the state, one-time federal money, sustainable money, redistricting, utilization, efficiency, what spending affordability does, how interest rates change. They all tie together. And now I'm starting to get into I may scare you in that this is starting to get complicated. Let's get back to basics. APFO at its core is just simply to make sure you have adequate infrastructure as growth occurs. We can make it as complicated as we want or as simple as we want, but that is its core function. And it relies heavily on your participation in order to succeed. And I'm going to roll down with, here are the latest charts that are generated by the APFO process. This is one of the biggest and most contentious items of APFO because it deals with the biggest and most heavily funded piece of infrastructure in Howard County, and that is the school system. These charts show utilization rates and are debated over and over and over. And we can get into minutia in APFO 102, 103, and 104 sessions in the future with this. But more and more parents, more and more residents are becoming intimately familiar with these charts and how it affects their schools in the future, how it affects redistricting, how it affects their child's education. And that's a very good thing. And we're hoping we can leverage that people understand the mechanism. APFO also can apply to many other items in their community. And we should get full utilization of this tool to have the best community that we possibly can. I get that I come off as a Debbie the Downer on a lot of these things. I'm going to counter with, there is room for improvement and we should take advantage of it. And that is not a bad thing. That is a good thing to find areas and continually improve our processes in Howard County. I'm going to leave the rest for Carrie and any questions we have. So since I closed the slide, I can see some of the chats, and I see Joel, who's been a tireless advocate himself for many of these issues, saying, I believe high school land came graded as part of the purchase agreement. Yes, but part of the purchase agreement, we paid for it one way or the other. Land is interesting, though. Let's talk about that concept real quick. We mitigate growth for schools using something called a school surcharge fee. It's charged on a per square foot basis. It has a bazillion exemptions out there. And in theory, if it were set correctly, would pay for all the enrollment growth that occurs based on new development. But what's interesting, we also have a companion funding item, the transfer tax. School surcharge is applied to new construction as it occurs at the rate it occurs. Transfer tax is a little more loosey-goosey. It occurs based on sales of new homes, old homes, anything that goes on. And it is an index to a particular value. It's somewhat arbitrary. But what its intended use is for, or at least stated intended use, is to buy school land. And we literally have millions of dollars that come in from the transfer tax every year that could be applied to school land purchases. It is somewhat of a bad practice to do things like float a bond and hope you pay for it with these funds, because it's an unsteady source of revenue. You don't know from year to year whether you're going to have enough to pay the bonds. But even if you use PAYGO, what I'm saying is we have a fair amount of funding coming in for land acquisition. So why are we having so much problems? We know we had to buy High School 13's land. That may have been roughly 10 million. Turf Valley was roughly 6 million. And there's a weird swap going on for potentially High School 14 with parkland and open space land and a Girl Scout camp and who knows what else. Where I'm getting with this is I'm not saying we have money to burn. I'm saying we have a very robust funding source from transfer tax coming in for land acquisition, yet we still seem to have a lot of issues. Why is that? Well, I don't want to oversimplify it, but there's a little asterisk on the language for these taxes, and they allow you to spend them for other uses. And that's exactly what's going on. Funding that's supposed to go towards school land construction is being siphoned off for deferred maintenance. Funding that's supposed to go for capacity improvements is going for renovations. And the more and more these dedicated funds are being applied to different uses, we're not checking that our dedicated funds are actually adequate to meet the needs that they were created for. And this shuffling of money makes it very hard to trace where our mitigation is coming in from growth. But it is pretty obvious from doing the math every year, and especially watching cuts in the budget, even when the budget increases, it doesn't increase proportionate with the needs. That our whole mitigation structure needs much more frequent and much more adequate review in order to deliver things effectively. And I see another Joel question here. The general plan says we need a new fire station. General plan says need more parkland inside the PSA. When the plan was to put the fire station in a park, nobody was paying attention to the park part of the general plan. Thank you, Joel. That brings up a whole nother component. We've seen, and it's not just in one administration, it's been in many, kind of a exchanging of public resources. Let's exchange parkland for a school site. Let's exchange a fire station site for a development. Let's exchange, et cetera, et cetera. In theory, if these exchanges are done at market rate and all that, it could be considered equitable. But the bottom line is all these public resources that we need, fire, park, police, schools, if they have dedicated funding sources, those dedicated funding sources need to be adequate to meet our standards. And we shouldn't cross feed a lot of these things. Getting rid of 60 acres of wooded land, parkland, to place a school is great if you really want a school. But for those who needed the parkland, as well as the expansion of the parkland, they just lost that opportunity. And we need to be very cognizant when our public resources are being, for lack of better words, horse traded back and forth to look like we're creating more infrastructure on the surface. But in reality, the net increase is nominal. And all this is very important to our general public. So let's face it, there is very few resources or outlets that are going to put this very simply for you. We're also very dependent on you, the general public, being aware of these things and putting these things together and expressing your needs and interests regularly in order to affect future legislation. And yes, I see they were going to use the fire tax for soccer fields. That's a perfect example. And I have friends in the fire department, and I love trees, and I don't like when resources are misappropriated either way. We need both. Any other questions or comments?
So, well, Brent, let's close it. Let's close it out here. And I think that example, the fire tax, and using it for something else, that's actually a perfect illustration of what happens when the general plan does not consider all these essential services and infrastructure needs. And so we need to be proactive as a community. If we wait until redistricting or until the budget time, at that point it's too late. At that point, all the pieces are baked in, and our opportunity to affect those things, the budget, redistricting, or other needs, starts long before that. And this APFO is one area, the general plan is another area, the comprehensive zoning is another area, but those are the leading indicators of how well we manage our budget, how well we're dealing with redistricting needs, whether we're doing it for based on the children's needs, or whether we're doing it to facilitate the developers' needs. So thanks to all who attended, and Brent, I really appreciate this presentation. It builds on very well from the one-on-one discussion, because it touches on comp zoning and the general plan, which are related to, which I think are closely related to APFO and really interconnected. So with that, I'll stop recording, and we'll say good night to all the attendees.
Thank you, Harry, for hosting.